Venezuela's Supreme Court has appointed new rectors to the National Electoral Council. As the world slowly reopens to tourism, June 16th has emerged as a significant date as the European Union plans on opening many internal borders. The World Health Organization Regional Director for Africa has warned that the continent is facing the rapid spread of COVID-19. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuela's Supreme Court has appointed new rectors to the National Electoral Council. A representation in the chamber, Magistrate Maquel Moreno, was delegated to swear in the new appointees. Indira Mayra Alfonso Izaguirre is named as the principal rector and president of the National Electoral Council. The swearing-in ceremony took place this Friday in the main auditorium of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal. A group of 25 Colombian opposition senators presented a writ for the protection of constitutional rights against President Ivan Duque after the arrival of US troops to the country. Senator Ivan Cepeda affirmed that the writ seeks to protect the rights of citizens residing in the areas where US troops will be based. The senator stressed the governmental decision could provoke a transnational military conflict. The group of 25 senators notes the Senate is the only body that can approve the entry and permanence of foreign troops in Colombian territory and called for President Duque to stop the deployment until a ruling is made on the writ presented. Dozens of people took to the streets of Rio de Janeiro on the first day that shopping centres were allowed to reopen in Brazil, despite the fact that the country remains the hardest hit by the coronavirus in Latin America. Inside stores, strict distancing rules were followed and most shoppers wore protective masks, even though Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has downplayed the seriousness of the pandemic and pushed local authorities to lift lockdown measures. Brazil has officially reported more than 40,000 deaths due to the coronavirus, the third highest death toll in the world. And Brazilian authorities continue to dig more mass graves to bury COVID-19 victims in the largest cemetery of Manaus city. As coronavirus deaths in Brazil continue to surge every day, cemetery workers are filling mass graves with the victims. In these graves, several coffins are buried next to each other, but maintaining a distance to allow for the identification of individual graves. As well as the huge number of fatalities, Brazil has reported the second highest number of coronavirus cases in the world at over 800,000. In Bolivia, a recovered COVID-19 patient has donated plasma to help treat others who've been infected by the disease as cases increase across the country.
Plasma treatment has shown positive results, and with COVID-19 being a new infection, we are still conducting research. So this treatment is being tested, and we have encouraging results.
The experience of having COVID is very tragic because you can die. Thank God I did not get to that. I also don't want other people to go through what I've been through.
This Friday, Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez ratified his intention to expropriate the agro-exporter Vicentin in order to rescue the company from the verge of bankruptcy and ensure food supplies for the population are not affected.
We are rescuing an important company. We are not taking the company away from anyone. We are rescuing a company that, if it were to continue like this, would cease to exist or would remain in the hands and assets that are not Argentine. We are not here to nationalize companies. We are here clearly to rescue companies that we consider central to the country's development.
The governor of the US state of New York signed into law a package of police reforms on Friday. The move came following the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police and the widespread protests against racism and police brutality. The reforms seek to make police officers more accountable, giving the public access to police disciplinary records and banning chokeholds. The measures also include giving the State Attorney General's office the power to investigate deaths in police custody and make it illegal to make a 911 report solely on race.
I'm going to sign an executive order today will require local governments and police departments all across the state, about 500, to develop a plan that reinvents and modernizes police strategies and programs in their community. We're not going to fund police agencies in this state that do not look at what has been happening, come to terms with it, and reform themselves. We're not going to be, as a state government, subsidizing improper police tactics. We're not doing it.
International organizations have condemned the decision by US President Donald Trump to sanction International Criminal Court officials. Trump announced that he will sanction any employee of the International Criminal Court investigating US troops. The court is currently investigating several cases of war crimes committed by US troops in Afghanistan. The Bahamas authorities have announced the resumption of tourism activities starting June 15th. Bahamas authorities have announced the resumption of tourism activities starting June 15th, and the initiative is part of a plan launched by the Bahamas Tourism Readiness and Recovery Committee. As part of the initial phase, hotels will open their doors and international boaters, yachters and private aviation will be allowed to enter Bahamian shores. COVID-19 tests will be required upon arrival. Meanwhile, international commercial travel is expected to begin in the second phase starting July 1st. The Bahamas has reported 103 coronavirus cases and 11 deaths, while 68 patients have recovered and been discharged from hospitals. Cuban authorities continue to prepare the country for the post-pandemic era once the infection rate is controlled. Our correspondent Naya Ratado brings us the details.
Cuban authorities are trying to create the conditions for a gradual transition back to normality. Experts on the island say the country could be entering the endemic phase, a period in which citizens should learn to live with the disease.
It is clear that because of the epidemic's characteristics, it can never be considered to be eliminated. In other types of infection diseases, you can make determinations, but because of the complexity of the virus, because it is a pandemic spread throughout the world, because it did not start the same way in all countries at the same date. That is, there are many things that indicate that we're always going to have cases.
Even though Cuba reached the peak of the pandemic on April 24 and every day there are fewer detected and active cases in the country, the risk is still present. This multidisciplinary team is trying to predict the spread of the novel coronavirus to stop it.
All these models assisted the decision-making. The country has designed a group of measures in different stages. These measures were advanced, and that started to bring the disease under control.
This June 11, Cuba reached 90 days with the presence of the virus in its national territory. Mathematical models indicate that Havana has become the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak. In recent weeks, we shows that the capital will define the success of the fighting to stop the spread of the virus.
What has actually happened in the last few days in our country is not that the pandemic has resurged, but it has been kept under control. However, it has taken longer to reach a desirable number, which is what the country is working towards, to have the minimum number of admitted cases. I think that we are going to remain in a hypendemic situation of sporadic cases, and we will not see a new outbreak. A new outbreak is going to be very difficult because there is already experience, a very clear focus on the disease.
The Cuban government has assured that in coming days it will announce new measures for the gradual reopening of the country's main services. The objective of the Cuban authorities is to avoid the endemic phase to the novel coronavirus and to eliminate the disease from among the population.
Naya Ratado, Telesur, La Habana.
And we have more stories coming up after this very short break, so stay where you are. Welcome back to From the South. As the world slowly reopens to tourism, June 16th has emerged as a significant date as the European Union plans on opening many internal borders. Some European countries, including Greece, Croatia and Portugal, have already started reaching out to tourists. Social distancing and hygiene rules apply, with face masks to be worn on transportation. Additional waves of reopenings are expected later in the summer, but for now, visitors from the United States aren't typically on a list of accepted tourists. The government of the United Kingdom reiterated its intention to continue its Brexit plans on Friday, despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The announcement was made by UK Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove on Twitter. Minister Gove noted that the UK would not extend the Brexit transition period, and on January 1st, 2021, it would officially leave the European Union. The First Ministers of Wales and Scotland had argued for the need for an extension, pointing out the transition period at the end of this year would be reckless due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Nevertheless, the European Commission's Vice President for Interinstitutional Relations, Maros Sefcovic, expressed that the EU remains open to an extension of the transition period. And the British Transport Secretary has announced that the use of face masks will be mandatory from Monday, June 15th on all public transport in England, with travellers facing a possible fine if they fail to comply.
Now, from Monday, it becomes mandatory in England to wear a face covering on public transport. That includes trains, buses, trams, ferries and planes. A face covering does not mean a surgical mask. Face coverings can be made at home, and you can find guidance to do so on gov.uk.
In New Zealand, Hamilton City Mayor Paula Southgate this Friday removed the statue of John Hamilton, a British captain who died in the Battle of Gate Pa against the Maori people in 1864. Her decision came after a Maori resident publicly declared that he had planned to tear the statue down during anti-racist protests over the weekend. The removal of the Hamilton statue is part of the reaction generated by George Floyd's murder in the United States, a violent act that triggered marches against racism and the withdrawal of symbols linked to colonialism and the oppression of minorities around the world. France's Council of State has granted permission to look into classified archives on the Rwandan genocide, hoping to shed light on France's involvement in the 1994 mass slaughter. The authorisation was given to French researcher François Graner, who will inquire into official documents exchanged from 1990 until 1995 during former President François Mitterrand's administration. The researcher is a member of the non-governmental organisation Suivi, whose works expose French colonial and neo-colonial intervention in Africa. Graner has noted the complicity of Mitterrand's government in the genocide, as officials had knowledge of the incidents and provided active support. The Rwandan genocide saw the slaughter of up to 1 million Tutsi and other ethnic groups by Rwandan Hutu forces. In a virtual press conference, the Director General of the World Health Organization said new mothers infected with COVID-19 should generally continue breastfeeding and not be separated from their newborns, stressing that the benefits outweigh the risks.
Based on the available evidence, WHO's advice is that the benefits of breastfeeding outweigh any potential risks of transmission of COVID-19. Mothers with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 should be encouraged to initiate and continue breastfeeding and not be separated from their infants unless the mother is too unwell.
Swedish Radio Symphony Orchestra will stage Mozart's Don Giovanni on Saturday amid social distancing rules due to the coronavirus. British director Andrew Staples will stage the 18th century masterpiece using cameras and screens as the main interface between the performers to preserve social distancing. While most orchestras around the world are just starting to resume performances, the Swedish Radio Symphonic Orchestra has stayed open throughout the pandemic, and Don Giovanni is their season finale. The performance will be broadcast live on Saturday, but it is also available on Medici, an online platform to stream classical music.
Our task is trying to tell this story in these times, and we had to find a way to recreate in this room what we've lost in terms of intimacy. We can't touch people, we can't go too close to people, and we can't do all of the normal things that people do in this opera. An opera about intimacy and about touching people and about the kind of dangers of doing that.
And we're taking one last and very short break now, so stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. The World Health Organization Regional Director for Africa has warned that the continent is facing the rapid spread of COVID-19. Despite the fact that the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Africa represents 3% of the global total, Regional Director Rebecca Machi Diso-Moeti explained that 10 of the 54 African nations represent 75% of cases and 5 have reported 71% of COVID-19 deaths in the continent. The official warned that the rate of infection could increase, taking into consideration that the COVID-19 pandemic arrived late to the continent and more than 290,000 cases and over 5,000 fatalities have already been reported. Dozens of families in the South African city of Durban have been left homeless after a fire swept through an informal settlement on the city's outskirts. Residents from the Lacey Road community in Sydenham were forced to flee their homes when the fire broke out at around 1 p.m. local time. An investigation is underway to determine the cause of the fire. Anti-racism protests continue to take place across Africa since the murder of George Floyd in the US. Solidarity events in Africa have been generally smaller than in other parts of the world, with small-scale protests often led by left-wing movements. Residents of a Nairobi slum took to the streets to protest against police brutality, while in Ghana's capital, Accra, the Economic Fighters League held a vigil for George Floyd. In Senegal, around 50 people took a knee in front of the memorial to the slave trade in Dakar.
All black people, we are all African people, and we're just demanding respect, unity, justice, equality, equity, everything. We are done being quiet.
This is intolerable. This is unacceptable. It is unacceptable because it is cruel. It is unacceptable because it is racist. It is unacceptable because it is unfair. If he died for that, he died for us. That means we are all George Floyd.
India has become the world's fourth most affected country by the coronavirus pandemic after the US, Brazil and Russia. This Friday, Indian authorities reported a total of over 300,000 COVID-19 cases and more than 8,000 deaths. In the last few weeks, COVID-19 figures have skyrocketed due to the relaxation of the lockdown measures. The country's authorities have now decided to reinstate strict measures in areas with a high risk of infection. The Laos People's Democratic Republic has become the first country in Southeast Asia to declare itself free of COVID-19 after 59 consecutive days with no new cases reported. The country discharged its 19th and last patient this Friday and has not reported any COVID-19 fatalities. Prime Minister Thongloun Sisoulith said this is an important victory, but in no way guarantees immunity against the virus. The PM stressed that the country's success was due to responsible citizens, strict containment measures, isolation and the prompt treatment of infected patients. Vietnam and Cambodia are the only other countries in the region to report no coronavirus deaths. Tunisian workers have buried dozens of migrants whose boats sank on their way to Italy earlier this week. 52 people, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa, died in the accident. The Navy and Coast Guards used divers and a helicopter to search for bodies, most of which were found in the same area. On Wednesday, the UN Refugee Agency said that between January and May this year, migrant departures from Tunisia to Europe have been 4 times higher than in the same period last year. 3 Zimbabwean opposition members have appeared in court to face allegations that they lied about being abducted and tortured by police. The 3 women, 1 a lawmaker and 2 activists, were admitted to hospital with various injuries in May after they were held during protests last month. They alleged that police subjected at least one of them to serious sexual violence. This follows an appeal by a team of UN experts for abductions and torture to end in the country, which they claim are being used to stifle dissent. Gunmen have attacked a security post in northern Ivory Coast near the border with Burkina Faso, killing at least 10 soldiers and injuring 6 others. This was the first major jihadist attack in the West African nation since 2016, when a raid on the southeastern beach resort Grand Bassam left 19 dead. President Alassane Ouattara said investigations are underway. Meanwhile, Defence Minister Hamed Bakayoko visited the injured soldiers and said arrangements have been made to secure the area and identify the perpetrators.
This is a terrorist attack. Whatever its nature, we are in the process of investigating it, and investigative services will be able to determine at the end of the probe the precise nature and origin of this attack.
This Friday, a bomb exploded inside a mosque in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, killing at least 4 people and wounding an unknown number. Violence has spiked in the country in recent weeks, with most of the attacks claimed by the Islamic State.
I was going towards the mosque. People were inside for prayers when an explosion occurred. After I entered the mosque, I saw dead bodies and wounded victims, and the body of the man leading the prayers was there as well.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.